Where did you get that tune from? That's on the reel, by the way. But when I joined advertising, it was, everything in my life was an accident, including life itself, I suppose. Because my teachers in school used to tell me that your parents made a mistake, and it was a romantic mistake, it was moonlit night, romantic mistake, it was moonlit night, all this sort of jazz, and they made this big mistake, and you were born, and you shouldn't have been by all rights, because they started telling me this when I was supposed to reach middle school, and they said you're supposed to grow up and start behaving like an adult, because by middle school you are given responsibility, you are supposed to perform according to the expectations of an adult world, and you're supposed to also mouth dialogues which have been fed to you by adults, and so forth and so on. So children tend to escape from the enemy, which is adults, all of you sitting here, by having a secret world of their own. And as children, we all had secret worlds. We had secret clubs, we had secret sign language, we had secret jokes, and most of the jokes were about susu kaka farting, and we were obsessed by it as children, and most of us who never grew up are still obsessed by it. So I mean, one of the reasons why most people don't call me to respectable sit-down dinners is because the conversation deteriorates rapidly towards the bathroom. Even by the time the second course of a very formal meal happens, with everybody sort of adjusting themselves and wondering why they ever invited me. And when I joined advertising, I joined it because I lived in Pune. I was studying in a place called Ferguson College. I got thrown out of the hostel in my first year for corrupting the morals of the Brahman boys. Because I found that they didn't know English too well. They were on scholarship and they were studying Sanskrit. And all the Brahman boys in Ferguson College, which is a Brahman college in Deccan Gymkhana in Pune, they were given certain scholarships, and I found the actual reason why Brahmins grow shendis. You know what a shendi is? It's a chutiya. You know, they shave the rest of their heads, they have this long thing at the back. And I thought it was some kind of religious thing because it put pressure on the right part of the brain to make you saintly or whatever. I didn't realize that it had a practical side to it, because the boys who studied Sanskrit and were in Brahman, all the Brahman boys, had to learn up by heart tomes of about this much of the Vedas, and it was by heart. So if you notice, all children who are asked to learn by rote, regardless of what they do, in a natural process of the physicality, when they sit on the ground with their legs crossed, tend to rock backwards and forwards when they recite whatever they recite repeatedly to learn it by heart. Have you realized that? That when you're learning something by heart, you tend to rock backwards and forwards in a very kind of rhythmic manner to be able to remember what you are actually reading. And when you're reading a tome about this size, somewhere along after about 4 hours, you fall asleep. And you fall forwards with your head on your chest. So to prevent that from happening, you tie your shendi to a little nail on the wall behind you. And every time you pass out, and you get jerked back into reality. So did you all know that this was the reason why the shendi is actually kept? There you are. You learned something new today. Are there any Brahman people here? There you are. Did you know that? Where's your shendi? When you are learning your scriptures, because a lot of you guys actually go up and perform ceremonies and eat large amounts of food and get paid for it, you know. You have to learn up all those things by heart. A lot of people today read it, but the original guys who actually went to college like Ferguson College and learnt the pothas, they actually learnt it by heart. It was like Zubin Mehta, who never uses a piece of music to conduct. He knows most of it by heart. So he must have been a Parsi Brahman at some stage. So anyway, the point is that I got thrown out of the hostel for teaching them Om Jai Jagdish's English version, which is a rugby song. Do you all know the English version of Om Jai Jagdish? The rugby song? No? The blacksmith told me before he died, don't know whether the bastard lied. Jai Jai. Be sung in tune. The blacksmith told me before he died, don't know whether the bastard lied. Bastard lied. Jai Jai. Jai Jai is the, what do you call, chorus. Okay? Which everybody joins in it. So there were all these 23 Brahmin boys who co-opted me to teach them English. And I thought the best way to teach English is to teach them a slightly non-vegetarian version of Om Jai Jagdish Sare, which they all knew. So they learnt it very quickly, and every morning we used to have a bathroom for hot water, which was past the staff quarters. So everybody used to go with a towel and toothbrush and, go have a bath and come back. And these boys used to go in tolis. 23 boys going together, singing the blacksmith song in unison with Jai Jai and all to learn English. And everybody is very, nobody understood what they were saying because the pronunciation wasn't that hot. So they all thought, wow, these guys are really cool. They're singing, Gandhiji's favorite bhajan and going to have a bath. Until my economics professor, Professor chap called J.Y. Joshi, listened to the second line, which was, there was a whore with a cunt so wide that she could never be satisfied. Jai Jai. Okay, and he sort of said, one sec, you guys, come here. What are you singing? So they said, they very proudly sat and sang the whole thing for him. And he was flabbergasted. He was quite a cool guy actually. So he says, by the way, who's the architect of this whole thing? Who taught you this? Since you couldn't have written it by yourself, considering your English is so weak. So of course, all the fingers pointed at me. I was given a polite letter saying that your services in the hostel will no longer be required as you are occupying the room that was occupied by Mr. Tilak. It's Ferguson College is very famous. It had Tilak, Gokhale, all these guys were alumni of the college. So they had their names on the rooms which we were staying in. They looked like little jail compartments, but nonetheless. So, so they asked me to leave perfunctorily, and I then took up a PG digs with a friend of mine. And he was in love with this girl across the road who lived in a high-rise building. And every evening, three of us, one Thai boy, this boy, Vijay Paransway and me, used to form a chorus and sing romantic melodies to this young lady in a slightly besura voice with great enthusiasm. And then her grandfather, who used to sit there reading at that time, one day sent us a note saying, will you please come up and see me? So all three of us lined up and went outside his balcony and said, yes sir. He said, see, which of you is trying to court my granddaughter? So Vijay said, me sir. So he says, if you promise to stop singing, I will introduce her to you. So Vijay eventually ended up marrying her, but he looked at me and said, what do you do? So I said, nothing right now. So what do you want to do? So I said, I'm not too sure. I think, I want to join the army or something like that. So he gave me a cutting from a newspaper, which was an ad from an advertising agency, which said, are you very popular with your friends, but never get invited to a formal family gathering? Do you have a shirt which you think is the best shirt in the world, but everybody else immediately ignores you when you wear it? So, and stuff like that. It was like people were slightly not center of popularity, but on the edge of it. So there were a whole lot of these questions, and he said, this is for you. He says, go and join this company which I was asked you for this. So I joined advertising, and I found that in advertising there was an enormous collection of adults who had never grown up. And they were given what was called creative license to be kids. And that's the nice part about advertising, or was. Now I think things have changed a bit and people have started taking themselves very seriously in my profession, and they drop paraphernalia and words and terms and marketing stuff and positioning and all this sort of thing. I thought positioning only came with the Kama Sutra, but obviously, it also comes with marketing. So when I joined advertising, there were no such disciplines. They want the whole business of the business was that you were given an assignment and you had to deliver it within a certain time frame, and it didn't matter when you came to office, when you didn't come to office, whether you bathed, whether you didn't bathe, whether you had long hair, whether you smoked dope, and so forth and so on. So everybody worked very hard, especially in the creative department. There were two sides to advertising. There was the suits and there were the creative. Now the creative were the guys who never grew up or wanted not to, and the suits were the people who sort of, like you guys, I think, who took themselves very seriously and talked jargon and were all MBAs at that time. They just started coming in as MBAs. So all the MBAs who weren't taken by the MNCs, because they were sort of lower grade MBAs, joined advertising. Because, so you had, in the same room, you had top of the class, which is the client, who were giving you the brief, and the bottom of the class, which was the agency. All wearing suits, talking the same language, and the guy from the top of the class is looking and saying, this guy, the bottom of the class, why is he telling me what to do when I should be telling him what to do? And so forth and so on. So advertising is really great fun because we used to see these constant personality clashes. But what was scary about advertising is that nobody, not clients, not management, not agencies, only creative people were concerned about the subliminals of the messaging and how it affected kids. Because a lot of the advertising, though was aimed at children for pester power, like Rasna and all this sort of stuff, a lot of it was actually not. It was not meant for children. It was meant for adults. And some of it was auto-suggestion, a lot of it was subliminal, a lot of it was sensual, sexy, erotic, and so forth and so on, and had double meanings and had long-term subliminal levels of reaching out to an adult audience who could assimilate and separate the fact that it was meant to be a smutty joke or not meant to be a joke. But for kids, it was very difficult to actually separate what was a joke and what was not, because they took it for real. So if a kid looks at an Axe commercial, most adults who look at it say, that's really funny and that's interesting advertising. I think so too. But if you look at it the way kids look at, say, angels falling out of the sky, there's a sudden process of growing up. And that Santa's got smelly toes, or wears his underwear outside his trousers and becomes super dick after he becomes Santa. They don't understand that level of separation. So for them, there is an element of innocence which is prematurely lost because of exposure to adult advertising. Now, very few countries in the world actually have even thought of how to protect children from adult advertising, from becoming prematurely adult because of the kind of messaging subliminal, not the obvious one, but what lies underneath, what they actually assimilate over a period of time and understand, is that the only thing that I've understood out of that from personal experience is that they tend to lose their illusions and their romance and their innocence through that advertising very, very quickly. And in a world that is constantly assaulting the innocence of children, regardless of what it is, including our education system. Whereas we should actually be preserving it. Because it's like the old story, when Nestle and everybody else came into India many years ago, they were propagating the fact that you take children of mother's milk and put them on artificial feed. And it was almost 10 to 15 years later that they found that the mother's milk was the single most important part of an immunity system which kids needed because of a minimum amount of access to mother's milk. And it took us 15 years to actually discover that scientifically before we started trying to get them back off artificial milk products and back onto the boob. Now, the fact is that I think to a very large extent, a lot of our education, a lot of our public messaging, a lot of our communication systems, a lot of our entertainment, whether it's movies or whether it's advertising, actually is doing exactly what weaning children prematurely and putting them on artificial sweeteners, is that it's really bad for them. And when we address this subject within our community, everybody tends to agree with each other, but nobody actually has yet devised a method of how to screen and protect kids from that form of advertising. And I don't know whether it's practical or not, and whether that kind of stuff is necessary. Now, whenever you turn around and say, okay, aim advertising not at adults but at kids, and imagine that all of it is going to be watched more by kids than by adults, it becomes suddenly restrictive. It becomes suddenly very, very single dimensional. And yet, because we don't know enough about children, and we've forgotten very quickly what it was to be like children, you realize that they also have very non-vegetarian jokes among them. And that they have their own style of humor and their own form of communication, which sometimes might not be so innocent. And we, as adults, sometimes discover them by mistake, because you sneak in on them when they don't expect you to be there, when they're in a huddle with all their friends, and you eavesdrop into what they're talking about, and you realize that they're talking about Susu Kaka farting most of the time, which horrifies adults, because you wonder why and at what length they talk about it and how much they laugh about it all the time. So there is, within education, entertainment, advertising, a huge hole which actually is not child sensitive to a very large extent, for two reasons. One is because a lot of the subliminals and the layered communication is very adult and cynical in its approach. It's, when adult humor is essentially very cynical. It's always at the cost of somebody. It's never pure humor. It's not funny if it's not at the cost of somebody, or cost of what you've been taught, or cost of what you hold, hold in great emotional content, or believe in the tooth fairy, and so forth and so on. The breaking of that myth becomes very funny. So adult jokes actually make jokes about Santa Claus and tooth fairies and angels falling from heaven. And children actually want to hang on to that and believe it as long as they can, because they actually do. And if you notice, most children, when they realize that the tooth fairy is actually your dad who replaces your tooth with a 1 rupee coin, they're actually very upset. Temporarily, but they are very upset, because sometimes they pretend to sleep and wait for the tooth fairy to come. And then suddenly they find this hairy, smelly dad who comes in, and puts his hand under the pillow, removes the tooth and puts in a 1 rupee coin. They say, but you're not the tooth fairy. He says, no, the tooth fairy is ill, so he asked me to do it. So, or some stupid excuse for whatever it's worth. But that's what it's all about. And if you notice that as adults, whatever part of us that we retain of children is the belief in the impossible. We as a world today, or as a country, live on hope against all odds. So you read the newspapers every morning and there's the hope. And you look at the records of all our politicians and there's the hope. And yet everybody believes that you go to sleep every day, even as adults, that tomorrow is going to be a better day. It couldn't possibly be as bad as today. And when you end tomorrow, you realize it was probably slightly worse. But the belief in the fact that tomorrow is going to be a better day is the child in you. Because it's against logic. It's against fact. It's against consistency of track records. It's against trends. It's against everything else. You always hope that the world is going to become a better place tomorrow. And that is the part of the child that you all still retain without even realizing it. And that when you give up that hope that tomorrow is going to be a better day, that your lives are going to improve, that your relationships are going to improve, that something is going to change by tomorrow after you go to sleep. And sleep is such a magical thing that it calms you, it protects you, it cures you of lots of things, and then you wake up fresh in the morning without a hangover and actually have clear eyes and you think today is going to be a better day. That is the child in everybody. Now just imagine if all of us collectively lost that capacity to dream and said, shit, tomorrow is going to be an absolutely rotten day and I don't want to wake up. What would it be like for us? I mean, just imagine. So we resort back as adults to becoming children because there is no other option. And today we are destroying the innocence of the child at a very, very early age. And we show other adults off that our children are so mature and so competitive and so aggressive and do so well in life by actually showing them what they can do in terms of their performances, make them sing and dance to Hindi movie songs and make them recite rubbish for whatever it's worth. And when you do that and you're constantly pushing the kids into areas which are full of pressure and tension and needing to please adults in adult terms because they don't really understand your world except when they sleep, because then they become children themselves. That is the tragedy of today. And I think what's very important in the room today is that all you guys have actually started to believe that the child in you is worth preserving. And that you have to go out into this, what is that? Time. God, okay. Yeah, I have an upside down watch. Sorry. So, also the kind of subliminals that we know, I'm not going to take 5, I'm going to take 10. Also the subliminals that we plant in children's heads which tick away like time bombs. We don't realize this, but we do this without even realizing the effect that it has. I'll tell you a very non-vegetarian story about the impact of subliminal embedding of time bomb messages. Okay, now all religions, regardless of whether they're Hindus, Muslims, even Christians, okay, actually teach children at a very early age that masturbation is a very bad thing. Okay, and that it has all kinds of side effects, like it grows hair on your palm, your eyes grow weak, you become weak as people, you become less strong, your resolve dissolves, all this sort of shit. But most important is that we teach them one basic thing, and it's across most fundamental religion religious teachings to children is that one drop of semen is equivalent to 100 drops of blood. And one drop of blood is formed after you eat 100 rotis. Okay, so just calculate that backwards. And this is inculcated into children when they are about 6 years old. Okay, when they go to various religious, things like RSS shakas, like madrasas, like little preschool or other Christian institutions. All this is subliminally planted in their heads. Now I'll tell you a story. I was in a military school and physical abilities were very important in our school because outdoors was as good as the education that we received in the classroom. We had a boy called Dilip from my house. I was in Yellow House, I was the house captain, and we had the inter-house cross-country race. It was a very big deal because our cross-country in school, even at that level, was 20 kilometers. And it was a hell of a arduous thing. For city boys, people like me, it was unheard of to complete 20 kilometers, before breakfast. Some of the small town boys could run it without even breaking into a sweat. Dilip was a natural. Nobody could touch him in the cross country. So when you entered a team of 25 kids, 5 houses, you had 100 runners. So the guy who came first got 100 points. The guy who came second got 99 points and so forth, so on. And cross country, other than being first, second, third, was also a house trophy. So the house that had the maximum runners in the first 25 or 30 runners actually got the cross country cup. Okay, so the morning of the cross country, we said Dilip is going to win, and we now have to calculate the rest of it because we are not worried about number 1 position because he's a cinch. And I get this hammering on my door at 5 in the morning, and I wake up, slightly groggy, and there's these 2 juniors standing in front of my house saying, "Sir, tragedy हो गई." मैंने कहा क्या tragedy हो गई? He said, "Dilip को tragedy हो गई." So I had all kinds of visions in my head. He's fallen off, broken his leg, got diarrhea, God knows what else. I couldn't imagine what could have happened to him. And I walk out of my room, and across the parade ground is Gogia between 2 kids, sort of leaning against them with his legs cutting a small and lonely furrow in the earth. And behind him were 2 more kids with a bed sheet. So they come up close and I said, "Gogia, what happened to you?" He says, "Nothing." So I asked the kids, "Kya hua isko?" So one guy tells me in a stage whisper, "Sir, nightfall ho gaya." Nightfall ho gaya means a wet dream. It took me a little time to figure out what they were talking about. But in the vernacular, if you have a wet dream, it's called nightfall. And there was this guy at the back with this bedsheet with this big naksha on it, of Gogia's. And Gogia is saying, "Sir, main to barbaad ho gaya. I can't stand. I'm so weak." So I'm trying to tell him, where the hell did he get this, I mean, because that's the first time I came into contact with somebody who would possibly been through his background. Now, it completely defeated me. Whatever we tried with Gogia, including calling the house doctor and saying, "Sir, tell him that his tanki is still full, this is the overflow." Nothing convinced him that he could get up and run the cross country. He actually came last. And he just about completed it. And it really bothered me, So I went into a little bit of history. And I realized that when his parents had come from Pakistan as refugees, they had become very pro-Hindu Vata and put this 5-year-old child into a RSS shaka in Daryaganj somewhere. And he was indoctrinated for about 1 year. Now after that he was taken out of that shaka and he left Delhi and came to the school at the age of 7. And from the age of 7 to 16 he was in school. So this little time bomb of his was, and in school we never heard of anything like this. So this time bomb was ticking in his head for that many years, very silently and devastatingly, that finally when it came up on the day of the cross country, Gogia was destroyed. because he had a nightfall. Now, it suddenly occurred to me the kind of subliminal message that was ticking away in his brain for so many years dormantly, because it was perfectly normal otherwise, was that when it kicked in, it actually destroyed his behavior in such a way that it makes you irrational as an adult. When you start sublimating children with messages of this kind. And we do it all the time. We do it all the time. Whether it's done in school, whether it's about masturbation, whether it's about sexual education, whether it's about all the taboos that we turn around and talk to the children in a very deflected kind of way. So what happens is that adults deflect taboos and give wrong information to children, who then carry that information into adulthood. It affects them under stress. So when you get into a riot or a communal riot, they go completely cuckoo. Which is why a lot of things done during communal riots are not understandable. That normal human beings can do this kind of thing. The fact is that if you actually examine that, you'll realize that all these have been planted at a very early age. And sometimes planted deliberately, sometimes planted by accident. And we need to be really aware of what the hell we're telling our kids. So, that's too serious. We'll see some fun films. So, the reason why I became good at advertising, frankly, I got known by reputation to be a great communicator with children. And I could never understand this kind of responsibility that they put on me. But I realized that I never treated children like children, because I was always much younger than they were in my behavior, in my thinking, in my breaking of rules, in completely destroying the so-called status quo of what we have. Children are great breakers of status quo. They love breaking the status quo, especially if they think that they can be outside of a behavioral pattern which is expected of them. And they do it with such glee. And you find that most communications which encourage kids to be themselves and break rules and be naughty and be wicked and not be goody two shoes and not be teachers' pets are actually the best communications of all. You know, because they're enjoyed by everybody, including children, even by mothers. Because unless you allow your child to experiment and grow as a personality on his own, and not within the straitjacket of the kind of rules that we set for them as adults, they'll never grow up to be interesting individuals. They'll be just patterns. They'll be just bunches of people who behave exactly like each other. So, like I tell MBAs at MBA schools, because they actually made the mistake of calling me and trying to teach them marketing sometimes. So most of my lectures are about gut reactions. And the greatest gut reactions that anybody has as a community is children. Their instincts are so good that a child and a dog will make out a bad adult immediately. Because they are so instinctive that they don't listen to the rationale of uncle is coming here and he's giving you gifts. Bullshit. They can sense it. That this guy is an evil son of a bitch. You know? So, you know, when communicating with kids, that's exactly what you have to do. You have to start allowing your instincts to be. So, to most MBAs, I tell them that you've been taught for 5 years one basic thing, and you have to now unlearn it in the real world. And that is, if you have a gut reaction, take a purgative. So, are there lots of MBAs here? Good. Isn't that what you were taught in B school? If you have a gut reaction, take a purgative, and that 2 and 2 has to be 4, and if it's 22, it's wrong. If it's not 22, it's not worth it. It's mediocre. Remember that. So children will teach you that, not adults. You have to go back and learn from them rather than start teaching them all sorts of garbage which we actually teach them. So let's see some films. Where are they? Hello?
जीरा गरजे दिल ये डोले झूम के बोले तारे छूले प्यास बड़ी है और भी बढ़ ले अरे खोल के बंधन तोड़ के ताले ये दिल मांगे मोर
ये दिल मांगे मोर.
Aha! This film is really special to me because of two things. I disagreed with the client. The team disagreed with the client. The client wanted well-to-do, scrubbed kids from high-rise buildings because that was the target audience. And we wanted little busty kids who all wanted to be Sachin Tendulkars. So the argument that we put across to the client, which is Pepsi, was the line is Dil Mange Maun. What is it all about? It's all about dreams. It's all about wanting to be something other than what you are. It's about tomorrow. It's not about today. Okay? Who has a bigger dream? A child who has everything that he wants or a child who has nothing? Whose dream is bigger? So they finally agreed with us and they said, yes, the Basti kids have bigger dreams because they have nowhere to go except up. And the children living in high rises have everything at the drop of a hat, and so most of them go down because there's nothing more to go up because the parents are such giants and have achieved so much in their lives that the children usually never grow in the shade. And whereas the Basti kids are actually, full of vim and vigor and they all want to be Sachin Tendulkar. And the second important part was because they were not actors, we didn't tell them that Sachin Tendulkar was going to be in a mask with them. And we sneaked him into the lot. And they jostled him and all. Nobody recognized Anjali because she's not a public person. So they practically trampled over her to get to Sachin. And I had to actually move out of the way and say, hey, don't worry, come and sit here, you'll get trampled. And these kids, when they saw it was Sachin, nobody moved. Nobody did anything. They were so in awe of him that they were plucking his sleeve to feel whether he was real or whether they were actually dreaming. And that was the difference that I found in kids who are sort of, rich kids versus really poor kids. There's an innocence about them. These kids are still, regardless of the hardships that they go through, regardless of the realities of survival that they go through, they retain an innocence which our kids don't do because they get everything on a plate. And that's what the difference that I found, is that these kids actually touched his clothes very delicately without, crowding him or anything to see whether he was real. And these guys wanted to sit and watch him. They didn't want to say anything. They didn't want photographs, nothing. So that's why this film is so special.
घुमा दिया ना 5 जूसी और एक क्रीमी फ्लेवर में पार्ले का
Smoothies.
Now, this is a campaign that Parle's had done for a little sweet called Smoothies, where they said, let's try and imagine what kids do or want to do to adults who do nasty things to them. How in their minds, if they had the power through a sweet to really get back at the adult who takes his cycle and throws it on the ground because his car is parked near it or whatever else it is, what would he like to do to him? So actually, we didn't do any research, but we asked some kids, says, what would you do? So a lot of the scripts came out of what the kids wanted to do. Now the next one is a classic example of that, because this one, the adults who saw this film as the clients, because it wasn't written, and we shot it on the location because the kids said, let's do this as well. And this is how we want to do it. And we thought it was a great idea. And we showed it to the client. They were horrified. And they obviously never ran it. But my kids grabbed the film and would take it with them wherever they went and show to all their friends and roll on the ground, see it 20 times a day and laugh and laugh and laugh because it was just up the street. So let's have a look at it.
घुमा दिया ना
5 जूसी और एक क्रीमी फ्लेवर में पार्ले का
Smoothies.
You know, no adult would have ever in their wildest imagination thought of a script like this for a respectable Parle's smoothies product, you know. And I kept telling the client, I said, you know, I know you don't personally like it, but don't worry about your personal likes and dislikes because you're an adult and you're not expected to actually understand this film. This is meant for kids and it's written by kids and this is how they see their world if they could possibly change it. They didn't buy it. And I know for a fact that the moment I showed it to kids, they would just ask me for a copy of the film. They said, can you give us a DVD? And they'd carry it with them like their most prized possession. And whenever they wanted to be special with their friends, they'd gather them together and show it to them on the DVD and repeat it 20 times, roll on the ground and laugh. Now, what is it that's so different between kids and us and adults? I mean, there's such a huge divide in perception, in what is funny, what is not. You know? And I'm sure secretly you all enjoyed this film, but publicly you'll be horrified. Susu War, as we called it, or they called it. They called it the Susu War. Between two adult establishments which they both hate. One is a nuisance maker and the other is a cop who's corrupt. Okay, so there's so many subliminals in this as well. It's about the cop. Okay, run the rest.
My mother. I love my mother. But she has another man in her life. No. Sheila auntie also has another man. Rahul uncle has two other women in his life. Every woman has another man in her life. And they are all here.
And we love to dress in Lilliput. Pump up the style, bring on the attitude. Lilliput, we live our fashion. We wear it, we love it. Lilliput.
Film that actually has a very adult idea in it. And this business of kids saying my mother has another man in her life, and though it might be him, the fact is that in itself is an adult idea. And that is not how kids think. But then this film was not aimed at kids only. It was also aimed at their mothers. You know? So advertising tends to have two masks and they keep switching them very quickly until they get very confused sometimes and they don't know who they are addressing, whether they are addressing kids or whether they are addressing adults, and they're two completely different worlds. And parents tend to take their responsibilities as parenting so seriously that they actually fail as parents. Just keep it simple. Here's three things that you must remember as parents. One is you must educate your children. Very important. And you don't have to do it yourself. You will send them to institutions that are already teaching them whatever they teach them. What you teach them at home is much more important than what they learn at home, in school. Because what they learn in school, everybody learns. But what they learn at home, it's always special. Because they become special children because of how much attention you give the kids as parents. Second is, you must teach them the fact that there is in the world something called right and something called wrong. And that your right and your wrong need not be their right and their wrong. But when they decide what is right and wrong, they must live by it. Because that is life. That you have to make a choice between what is right and what is wrong. And the third thing is, as parents, is your real and only job is that when your children, if ever, they slip and fall, you should be there to catch them. That's it.